All right. So, hello everybody. Welcome to, I think this is session 4. Yeah, session 4 of Bootcamp. Uh, Yesterday we did, we looked at dynamic cases and business processes and how we can start to build tools in Creatio to handle workflow using the data that we added to our pages and objects. We recorded the data, and then we can set up how we want to transform it, send emails, do that work with data. Today, we're going to look at the employee section, which is a special kind of section that kind of connects contacts in the system and system users. And then we'll move into looking at users, how to give them permissions to do things. We'll look at the license manager and all that about giving people keys now to get into the system, and look at the data you've set up and go through the workflows you've defined. So I'm going to get my screen share going. And you should be able to see first thing Creatio's website. Because I realized that I meant to show you how to get a trial real quick yesterday, and I did not do that. So I want to show how you can do that, because especially if you're going for the Bootcamp certification, or not for the Bootcamp certification, analyst certification, or really if you're just trying to learn the platform, getting one of the trials on Creatio's website and practicing is one of the best ways to really ingrain the knowledge in your brain. So if you just go to creatio.com, you should be presented with this page. And then up in the right-hand corner, there's this button, Try It Free. And if you click there, Creatio is going to ask what kind of trial you want. You can choose whichever to get going. The studio free, or like the studio version over here, is going to give you just like the business process designer and the ability to build workflows, but it's not going to really include too much in existing data models. So like you can have accounts and contacts with it, and that's about it. The CRM version will include Creatio standard products that we'll talk about a little later when David does the pricing and additions and all of that in a later session. But Creatio has products for marketing, sales, and service. And if you pick the CRM trial, it's going to give you a 2-week trial of all 3 of them at the same time. And then the 3 below here, these standalones, that they do what you would expect. They'll give you just the chosen product. You pick the sales one, it's just going to give you sales. So you can pick whichever one of these to get your hands on the Creatio for 2 weeks and try it out. It is a 2-week trial. You can't it will expire at the end of the 2 weeks, so feel free to go in, break it, try things, make something wild. It's just finding those edges and just get your hands on it. Just so you know, you will get capped at 2 of each of these kinds of trials being available at the time. So you can have 2 CRM, 2 sales, 2 service. But if you try to go for a 3rd service while your other 2 are still running, it'll tell you you're over the limit. And so you can't have another until at least one of the 2 expires, just as a heads up. But then all you have to do once you're here, pick your edition, and then Creatio is just going to ask you to log in or make an account on their website, and then you'll be off to the races with the trial. So highly recommend doing that. Get your hands on Creatio and try out some of the things we've been talking about. But all right, so back to my Creatio instance. So what we want to look at is the employee section. And the thing I wanted to show, just because we just talked about getting a trial and I'm in a trial, the first section I want to look at, employees. I put it into the studio workplace. It wasn't by default in any of my workspaces, at least that I found. So what I did was I went into that workplace designer through the system designer up here, and then down all the way to the bottom here to setup view and workplace setup. And I just went to studio, the studio workplace, and I just added a new section under the list here, and I picked employees, just so that's how I got access to it. But let's look at the employee section. So employee section is for kind of what you'd expect. It's for tracking employees within your organization, but it has some unique attributes that I wanted to go over, because there's some decisions you can make on whether you want to use it or not. But essentially what the employee object is, if I click on Simon Clark's record here, it's kind of a middle ground between a contact record and a system user record. So if I open this page, see there's some elements here that like name, job, full job title, some communication options that you'd expect to see on a contact record. Addresses, pretty standard stuff. But then I can go under career, it'll include job history. That's also available in the contact record. But then the thing that's not normally available in the contact record is a user record here. So there's the user count. There's a connection here to Simon's user record that we'll look at in a second, and the contact. And so this section kind of functions as a middle ground point to view information about both. So whereas contacts can be just people overall, like customers, like people you meet, your contacts at different organizations that you call to like get info, the people you talk with a lot, external friends of the business, however you want to define what contacts are. The employees section can be kind of like a distilled down version of that to just the people that are in your organization, and be a central view of both elements of their contact record in case you need to update like their job experience. Maybe they're moving to a new office, maybe a new position. And then you also need to adjust their permissions at the same time. You can come here and manage both their roles and their career. I think that's kind of the gist of it. I just wanted to point it out because it's handy if you frequently would encounter that use that use case. It will almost certainly come up in the certification exam, though I don't always see it used in full implementations. It is something that's, at least in the way I think about it, sometimes on the chopping block if you don't have enough in the employee section to really warrant its use. You can just manage contacts and you could just manage system users. But that's the employee section. And then so I wanted to move on to the system users, which is probably what you'll be using a little bit more. All right, so system users is in the Studio Workplace by default. You can access it there. And really just from clicking on it, it's a list of everybody that has or has had a login to the instance. So I can see what the user's login is. Are they currently active? And then there's a couple pieces of information that are pulling down from the contact record. And this is where I want to look at a little bit about why the employee section is a little kind of, it's useful if you can see enough juice for the squeeze to use it, but also it's not fully necessary, because down here is Simon's user account that we were just looking at, or we were looking at his employee record, and you'll see that if I open up his user, first thing up at the top here is a contact record. A user in the system needs to have a contact record as a basis of building their login. You can't make a login for somebody without a contact. So if they work in your organization, you will have to have a contact regardless of whether or not you want to use employees, because you will need it for system users. You'd also need a contact if you were going to work with Creatio's portal to give somebody like an external login, since the contact is that hub of like tracking how you've interacted with the person. You need something to anchor all that information to. There is a type here. You can do company employee or external user, that is internal user or portal user. There you can set the Creatio calls it the culture, but you can, and it's just English US. That's what I've got turned on, because you can have different languages enabled that will adjust what the default language should be displayed is, as well as there's some orientations depending on the language that can change in the UI. You can define a homepage for them. To my knowledge, as of right now, this is just you pick sections, and you can say that they should start in the account section. I don't frequently use this option, but this is potentially useful. Say if you're building somebody that works with cases a lot, you could set that their home screen should be cases. You can change their date and time format. There's tons of options in here, but you can set their date and time to be formatted how they would prefer. And this one, they can also set their system preferences. I'll show you where that is too. But and then are they active or not? Is the login enabled? So if they leave the organization, you can deprecate their login. You don't have to delete it, so you can have the record of they did at some point have a login and maintain any connections to records that they as a user created, but they can't actively log in. It's pretty straightforward. Can define a username, an email for them that you can pull from their contact record, a phone, password, confirm password, and then there's a password expiration date. And then also you can manually assign that they should reset the password. If Creatio is going by the system settings for like passwords should be reset every 3 months, it will handle prompting the user to reset every 3 months. But you can also manually trigger this flag here, and then the next time Simon logs in, he'll be prompted to change his password. I usually do this when we're just starting with a new client and they have new logins, that I'll give them the kind of the general, like, here's your password, it's password number 123, just to get you in the door, because I don't know what you're going to want as a password as a user. But then I'll check the reset password, so you can use my one-time simple password, and then you'll get prompted to make something more complicated. And then I also do that if people ask me to email and ask me to reset the password. Same reason. I don't know what you want yours to be. You guys get it. You can assign roles, both organizational and functional, which that's the next on our list that we'll look at. Licenses. This list here is every license to perform an action in the system that is enabled in this instance. Because I have a trial, Creatio just has a standard list that they'll give trial users as like, here's 5 to try this application and 10 to try this one. You can see there's like a bunch in here that you could look through if you're curious. There's some standard Creatio ones. There's some like, there's the Zoom connector one license. Like the trials just give you a standard list, and then you can just decide this user. So Simon should have a sales license, and he should also have a service license because he'll be working cases. You can see there's the external user, that's for portal users. And then maybe Simon's going to be making Zoom calls, so he should have that one too. If the user doesn't have a license, they'll get prompted to say license to perform action is missing. And a user must also have a license of some kind for their login to work. You can give them whatever to get in the door. I could give them, say, like, if I gave Simon just the Zoom connector for Creatio Cloud, that doesn't let him do sales, it doesn't let him do service, it doesn't let him do marketing. But if he has nothing, no licenses whatsoever, when he gets to the login page and types his username and the password, clicks login, Creatio will say, you have no licenses. But as long as you have one, it'll let you into the home page. It's just then when you start clicking on things to try to perform actions and try to say like add a new case or add a new opportunity in sales, that's when Creatio is going to start saying like, well, you don't have a license to do that. You have a license to make Zoom calls, and that's it. The rights delegation tab, the way this page works is that you can temporarily reassign permissions to another user. So the idea, I haven't used it a ton. We haven't had the use case come up in implementations yet, but the way it's always been described to me is if say like you have a approver that for your team approves time off, like internally for us at Keen 360, when I request time off, it goes to David, and he has to say, yeah, sounds good to me. That's not going to mess with any of our upcoming plans. Like we've got a call, like we don't have a call on Friday that I need you for. If say David was off when I sent that request, he could come in and say delegate permissions for a couple days to somebody else internally, and then they would get the approval request while he's gone. So it's not idling. It's like, Kevin, you can't have your time off requested because David wasn't in today. That's the idea with it, at least. So you can delegate permissions. So that would be if David wants to pick somebody himself and say that I want to give my permissions to, let's say, Caleb Jones in the system. Just pick somebody to be like, I'm delegating the permissions to Caleb while I'm gone. On the other side, if he wanted to request, he could request another user to say like, I know you're going off this week, and so I request to take over for you. So that's the idea with the rights delegation. Access rules. I don't really use the range of IP addresses, the range of allowed IP addresses, but you can add those to users to say that Simon's only allowed in at a given IP. The session settings, like how long is Simon idle before timeout? I believe default it's 15 minutes, I think. Don't quote me on that one. I think it's 15 minutes, but you can override it and say like, it should be 10 minutes or 100 minutes. And you can add however many you want, really. And then down here under sessions, there's nothing on this record, but let me go to my login that the trial has generated with my picture. And you can see there's a couple sessions here for Bootcamp listed, that if I click on these records, it'll tell you where I logged in at, how I logged in with the browser, and when the session started and when it ended. And if, say, I was an admin and I wanted to kick somebody out, I could click finish session, and that will forcibly log the user out. All of that makes sense so far?
Yes.
Cool. All right, so that is system users. Next, we'll look at building some organizational roles and functional roles as the basis for defining permissions. So, you can access the two types of roles from up here in users. There's these little circles that will take you to org roles and functional roles. And you can toggle the screens and it'll adjust. If for whatever reason you also need to access them, you can go system designer, users and administration, and then there'll be users, org roles, functional roles. And so you can get to them that way. So organizational roles and functional roles are both ways of grouping users by some kind of attribute that you would want to define as like a team, whether you want to define like a certain office or like a job that somebody does. And because with organizational roles versus functional roles, it allows you to build a kind of like a crisscross diagram to assign roles and give permissions to a set of users. And the way I try to keep them straight in my brain with the organizational versus the functional roles is that organizational roles are more for defining groups of users based on org structure. So I remember the example I was given when I started was like a bank. If you had a bank with different offices and they had a division for like the East Coast of the US and then a West Coast US, those would be in different states and potentially have different uh, rules and paperwork that they need access to. So you could define an org role for East Coast branch, West Coast branch. Then within those branches, there's a job to work as a teller at both branches that the teller is going to need specific permissions just by the nature of doing their job. And so you could have a org role that is East Coast branch, and then another one that is West Coast branch, and then you do a functional role that is teller. And so a user could be assigned to the org role East Coast branch tellers, but then they also get the functional role of tellers. So it's a little difficult without the picture, I feel like, to show the intersection, but that way, though, if you do it, you could assign necessary paperwork, maybe. Like I always like to think of it like tax forms, but if you're managing any kind of like HR functionality in the system, that your users that are in the East Coast branch are going to be in one state that may have different tax filing rules versus the users that are in the West Coast branch. And so then that way you could split them to know the East Coast branch users need these forms, the West Coast branch users need access to these forms. But if they're working as a teller, they need access to this section, and this section, regardless of where they're at, because that's their job. It's, yeah. So you can build an org role. You can see there's support lines here. You can have like accounting department. Just some examples to start with. You can have if you click new, you can make a new role. And just as a heads up on behavior on this page, if I say new role, organization, let's say, hang on, let me capitalize this. So say I make the East Coast branch. It's going to add a new child record under the element that you have highlighted when you pick the new button. So if I say I want to make the West Coast branch now and I don't re-click on employees, if I type in West Coast branch, it's going to go under the East Coast one, and then I have to reassign it. There are two groupings in here for both the org roles, and if I swap the functional roles, the page isn't really any different. All employees, all external employees, or all external users, that's for internal users and portal users. You can have different structures depending on if you're having the difference between a self-service portal versus maybe a partner portal where you have partners come in to manage different aspects of sales and stuff. Like, there's potentially different roles that need to be managed in terms of working with opportunities on the portal versus like documents, things like that. So you could have different portal permissions. But then other than that, once you've defined the groups, you can add users. The Creatio is going to try to turn on this management role here. When I was first learning the system and I took a course at Creatio, they told me don't use the management role. In that course, and I've just stuck with it. I think because there's some trickle down hierarchy that can happen here that the larger groups will, if you build a child item, so say I do like East Coast branch, and then I do I say do East Coast management. Underneath the branch, there's a trickle down functionality that management will get the general branch permissions. That I think if you use the management role, it confuses that hierarchy a little bit. Why is the option still there then? If Creatio is going to It just actually told me in the course not to use it. I'm not sure, but just relaying what I was told. And I haven't had any come up to use it. Functional rules here under org roles is for if I want to map for ease of setup a functional role to an org role, I can. And what does that mean? That if we go by our use case of the East Coast versus the West Coast branches, let's say I had another division under here, not an organization, of, so I do East Coast tellers. And then maybe add another one for West Coast just to West Coast branch. And then I'll do underneath that, not org division. No, East Coast, West Coast tellers. So I've got my two branches and I've got a group of tellers in both. And they say I have a functional role that I want to define as these are things that tellers can do. I'm going to go through a lot of the permission structure in Creatio, which I'm going to move to next, and we'll start looking at how you can use these groups to set up permissions. But I'll go through and I'll say like the tellers need to use this section and that like they maybe need to access. I don't know what they would use in this case. Maybe cases. I haven't thought this use case out fully in terms of an IA, but so they have gone through and I've set up that they need to be able to work with Excel files. They need to manage 3 or 4 different sections, and they've got different permissions to access records that I don't want to have to set that up for 2 different groups for my East Coast branch and my West Coast branch tellers. I just want to be able to make a change to the teller's functional role and have that affect all the users in the org role. I can go to the East Coast branch tellers and say that this functional role here, that anybody in East Coast tellers should get the functional role of tellers. Same with the West Coast branch one. And then that way, if I make a permission change for tellers overall, it will affect both East Coast and West Coast tellers. All right, any questions on that? All right, hearing anything, so I'll move along. There's also access rules that you can define here at the role level to do user timeout, range of IP addresses. Same idea, trickle down to a group of system users. If you wanted to assign a user to the group, you just click users, add existing, and you can pick who you want to put in it. I'll put Caleb in it. Simple as that. That's how you build out you build users, and then you can group the users into roles. And then now we'll look at how you can use the users and the user roles to actually set permissions. So going back to my system designer again, we're now going to look at the 2 pieces underneath organizational roles and functional roles, just going right down the left. Object permissions and operation permissions. From a high level, object permissions is for how you interact with like a section object in Creatio. So like say I'm working with accounts. Operations is, can I see accounts? What accounts can I see? And what attributes on accounts can I see? Like what parts of this object can I view? Operation is more for, can I do something? Like, can I export to Excel? Can I run a business process? Can I send emails? Stuff like that. So if I go into object permissions, there is list of sections will be the default filter. You can see it says sections up here. And I will see the title and name of my objects in the system. If I wanted to not just look for sections, I wanted to look through either lookups to try to see permissions on my dropdowns. I can change the lookups, or if I wanted to view every object in the system, I can also toggle to that. I can also then search by name if I know what I'm looking for. But let's stick with sections for now, and we're going to stick with the account. So at a glance, I can see operation permissions enabled, record permission enabled, and column permissions enabled, which Creatio decided to go with the most confusing method possible of having operations permissions as a separate thing, and then operation permission singular underneath objects, because I guess it just needed to be more complicated. But the two are different. And what it means here, if I click on account, operation permissions here is, can I even use accounts? Like, am I just entirely blocked from seeing accounts as a section exists? Can I read in the account section? Like, I'm allowed to read. Can I just blanket create in the account section? Can I maybe read records in the account section, but not delete? That's what operation is. Record permissions are for a given account. Like I said, not just all accounts, but let's say I pick one. I've got like an account for Target. I don't know why I'm picking Target, but that's what I'm going with. Yeah. And can I read the Target account? Can I edit it and can I delete it? That specific record. That's what record permissions is for. And then column permissions is for down to like restricting a certain chunk of data for users. So like if you're going to store on a contact, for example, their like social security number, that's not something you want open to everybody. I wouldn't even recommend storing it, but some use cases you may come across that it needs it. And in that case, there's going to be maybe like 3 users you need to limit the group to. That's what column permissions is for. You can block it to every user except that really isolated group. So use operation permissions. The way this is set up, you'll notice that there is a priority here. We'll go back to the beginning on how to set some of these up. So by default, accounts has operation permissions turned on, and it's covering all external users and all employees. And there's a priority here. The way it works, and it took me a little bit to get my head around this, is that when Creatio gets to the section for accounts for a given user, and it's trying to determine if you can access it or not, it works on that it's going to start at the top of this table here, check row by row, is my user in that group? If they're in that group and that's there's permissions defined for them, that's what I need. I'm going to go back to what I was doing. So the thing to have in mind with this is that if you say do with accounts that maybe you want all employees to just be able to read accounts, for example. You don't want them to be able to do anything else. Just generally, they should see accounts exist, but you want to lock down who can actually make changes. Maybe your finance managers group, but that's an out-of-the-box one. Let's pick the tellers one. Let's use one of the ones we actually made. So maybe your East Coast branch users, you want them to be able to read and create records. If Creatio is coming in the list, the way I've set it up, all internal users, like all company employee users, are part of this all employees group. And so when they open accounts, Creatio is going to go like, is my internal user part of the portal users group? No. Are they in the all employees group? Yes. Their permissions are read, and then it's going to stop looking. Even if that user is in the East Coast branch group as well. So the way you want to do it is that put the smaller group above the bigger group, so that Creatio is going to start looking and say, is my user in the portal group? No. Is my user in East Coast branch? Yes. They should have create, read, edit, and delete permissions. I'm good. And then if they're not in the East Coast branch, only then we'll go to the general group that says they can only read. I'm sure that probably makes only partial sense. Yeah. It twisted my brain for a bit on how to set the permissions up with that. But yeah, practice will help to solidify it. Yeah. That's one you just have to do repetition on. Record permissions. So the record permissions is, as I was saying, who has access to the specific account record. And so out of the box on accounts, because you want a lot of employees to be able to work with it, any person that creates an account record shares access with everybody else in the system. The record permissions, rather than working by just the priority and a user or role, works on who created the record. So you can define it to say that, like, if say a East Coast branch user creates an account record, regardless of which user in the group, they just have to be an East Coast branch, that then all East Coast branch users should obtain permissions. Now, what permissions should they get? Maybe they all get read. They're going to get overridden with employees in this case anyway, but you can define control based on those authors to say, like, so you're working in like with HR and you've got a finance document that you maybe want that, like, it's going to be created by somebody in HR, and HR is going to do some work with it, but you want to make it exposed to users. Like say you're putting in a tax form, HR is going to want to update it as maybe a new form's released, or like some of that like the information during the year will change, and then they're going to update it. But you want that to be the responsibility of HR and not just any random user to come in and be like, actually, maybe to go to the holiday calendar, be like, actually, this Friday's a holiday. Yeah, you want to restrict who can do that. And so you could have a role that is, if the record author is somebody in HR, HR gets read, edit, delete permissions, but all employees, they just get read. If you turn this setting off, like if you turn any of these off, the permissions just won't be applied. It'll just assume users can see it and edit it. Like there just won't be a check on access. And if you clear all of these rules from here and say make it empty like this, only the record author will get access. By default, as long as record permissions are enabled like this, you go into accounts and you make an account, you will get access to an account. Creatio is not going to yank the permissions from you unless there's a process that says, like, when account created, remove author access, which I don't know why you would create that, but that's the exception I see. Other than that, you make the record, you get access to the record. You get read, edit, delete permissions because it's your record. The record permissions are defined more on how you're sharing that access based on who you are. So should the rest of the system get access to an account, then as a setting up here, the blank one is not set, meaning they don't get permissions for read. There's granted, which is the green checkbox, and then granted with right to delegate means is really the difference between, do you just get access to see this account, or do you get access to see the account and you can share it with your 5 friends that also need it for their workflow? is really the difference between the two. So that's how record permissions get defined. And then column permissions is you have to add a new permission that is what values do we want to control access to. So let's say we're on an account, so maybe something that seems like reasonably set up to do this. I don't know. I don't know. Maybe we want to protect their annual revenue field and not just share it with everybody in that system. So yeah, we'll add that we want to track that column. And then you'll see that there's now a priority user role and access level. This will work similarly to the operation permissions, with Creatio is going to check the highest level first and then work its way down as long as it doesn't find the user. Yeah. And so there's a permits reading and editing is the blue book with the little pencil icon. I'll make my screen a little bigger because it's cutting off the screen. You can deny reading and editing with the red one, or just permit reading. And you can add more roles to the group to say that East Coast branch. I want to deny all employees, but East Coast branch can get reading and editing permissions. And that's how the column permissions work. And if you wanted to track more columns, you just add more columns here. It is advised, though, to consider how many you're monitoring, because very quickly the list of fields that Creatio has to check every time you open a record can get long, and it can start to cause the system to struggle a little bit as it processes that list every time you open a record. Let me see, Shamar, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, as it relates to the use record permissions, I noticed it didn't have the priority column as the other two. Does Creatio read that data a bit differently, or the permissions a bit differently for that one?
Yes, it does. With record permissions, it doesn't use priority because it's not necessarily about just generally checking overall access. It's how to distribute record access based on the author. It is like it doesn't have that same hierarchical, like starting at the top and reading down to determine whether or not you should see it. It's whether or not you're in the recipient of this user role who obtains permissions. You just get access to like the defined permissions to the record if you're in this user group, as long as this user group's the author. It's more of an if then. Yeah. Like if all employees make record, then all employees gets access.
All right, noted. Thank you.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
Okay. All right, so I'm not going to apply these, but if you change any of these permissions, Creatio is going to say that it needs to update the permissions. Actually, I could do this. I'm a system admin, so I get override on this anyway, so it's fine. I'll do apply. So it'll say that the record permissions have been modified because we changed record permissions here, which means it's going to have to go through all the accounts and readjust the defined access. I mean, if we add a new rule that says finance should now read this record, whereas in the past I hadn't even been able to see it, Creatio is going to go through all the records and make sure that they all abide by that logic. So I'll save it. It's going to run. It'll run in the background for us once it gets going. And then it'll let us know that the job's done. Let's look at operation permissions. So operation permissions are for, can I do a certain action in the system? So just looking through a bit in here, there's like cancel running processes. Like, can I cancel a business process that's running? And a lot of these are going to be by default system admin. And these will run on the same hierarchy check that we were looking at. So if I add an operation permissions and say, I want our East Coast branch to be able to have some ability to manage the process log by clearing canceled business processes, they can be added to this list. By default, everybody's yes, because if you're adding them here, it's assumed that you want to give them access to. But if you wanted to block a group, you can say that their access level is none. And then the position over here will abide by the comes in first, the East Coast branch. Should they have like is the user in here? Yes, then they're done. Well, that's kind of really all there is to the operation permissions. There's just I'd say look through the list to try to find some of the ones in here. Like there's can run all business processes, can run actualized contact age process, which is the most complicated name for the birthday update I was talking about the other day. That's just refresh based on today has the contact's birthday passed. Can they change access rights to a column and change operation permissions on an object? Corporate tags management. Can they manage the list of tags available for records? Manage landing pages. You get the idea. There's a bunch of operations in here as operation permissions that you can control whether or not the user is allowed to do. Let's see if our refresh went through. Aha. So I went into my notifications and I've got my system messages where I was saying that about my duplicates would show up, I think on Monday or Tuesday. I don't know, whichever day that was, that our permissions update went through and I can see that now my the permissions for account has been updated. Can they manage the mobile app? Yeah, I don't know too much what I can talk about here. I'd say go through this list and try to look through some of these because there's some elements that in here that you're just probably not really ever going to look at. I don't really frequently run into needing to give users the ability to generate commands or ignore access check by IP address. It's useful to know it's there, but I just don't cross it a lot. The one I do see a lot is can import from Excel and can they export to Excel, because that comes up a lot on whether or not you want somebody to just be able to go to a table and say, look at all that sensitive data, I'd like to export it. Changing permissions here for Excel export and import will blanket across the system. Can you even look at Excel buttons? There's not one here, but like, can you export a table to Excel? There is also the option. It's slowly been starting to build out, but you could probably see it. If you're thinking about it, when I said that like it's an all or nothing on the Excel export. You can imagine that gets a little annoying because some tables you might want to give people the ability to export, but like obviously not all of them because some tables will have sensitive info in them. Going back to the object permissions, there's this advanced operations tab that for a given object, such as an account, you can say, I want to give all employees permission to export. So that way you can, on an object by object basis, say this one's fine, export to Excel, and still block the more sensitive tables. I think if there's anything else on permissions I can cover, what is going to be useful for the certification exam as well. We haven't looked at do by all by object. You can do operation permissions for system actions. Let me go back to my system designer list because I've just got that nagging bit at the back of my head that I'm forgetting something. Oh, so the audit log and the change log. So audit log, just going through this user setup, that you can have audit on system actions for like you can see this is when I logged in to say there's like log successful authorization of Kevin's user account. There's several audit options you can turn on in system settings to say like audit. How we go on? System settings. I'm gonna filter it by audit log culture. Folder. Log. Yeah, so there's a couple. There's like log client IP range events, log denied operations management events. So like if somebody tries to do something, they're blocked in an operation permission. Log case not found, or logo case not found. That's not a log yet. Log user management events. And all you have to do is come in and say that you want check true to say you want them to show up in the audit log, which this one's true because that user management events, that's me being authorized to log in. But client range management events, this one's going to be disabled because it's currently not being recorded in the log. And then the change log is for object fields because there's two ways you can monitor those fields you don't want really to be changed too much. You can see if I open the change log, I'll get my list of objects again. Same rules, all objects, lookups, and I can say I want to go to accounts and I want to enable logging. I want to monitor some fields on accounts to see if they're changed. And what I can do is say that I care if the type field's changed and if the name's changed. And then maybe if the city industry's changed. Because I want to get a record of that. I want to know if somebody comes in and they mess with those values. So I'm going to apply it. Give it a second for Creatio to save it. And then once this is enabled, I can come to the log and Creatio will record previous value, new value, who changed it, when did they change it, and I can see the history of that field. Same rule with this one as with the column permissions. Be careful how many, like just be mindful really of how many you enable so that it's not every object for every column because that list will get really, really long really fast. Let me go to an account, say Apex, and I'm going to change its type to supplier, and I'm going to change its industry to construction, and I'm just going to change all the fields. I'm going to save it. And that's relations. That's record permission, so that's actually handy to show while we're here. From a given record, this lock up here, this is your record permissions. It'll only show up if you have record permissions enabled, but this is where you can go if you do have access to a record and you have rights to delegate. You click the lock and you can say that, oh, I want to share it and add a new permission, a new read access right to say East Coast branch, and it'll get added here under the read elements, and then you can save it. And so that's how you could share that access if you have rights to delegate. I might not actually know where the log is in the UI yet, because they're still pulling some stuff in, but you can also get it back in the change log. I go under the account, and then I can go log data, and you'll see that a change was made to Apex just now, and then I can click the field to say that the column was changed. And because I just turned on logging, it didn't capture the old value, but it records the new value. Once the logging's on, it's continuously updated. It'll start capturing the old values too. And I can turn on filters from I want to see changes from when to when, who made it, what record was it on, and what columns were changed. I think that's what I got on permissions. Let me go back real quick because I want to make sure that I've covered everything in here that we want to. You won't really need external access for the certification exam, if I remember correctly, which I'm 98% sure that I am remembering correctly. External access those for if supports you get a ticket in with Creatio support and they need to take a closer look at the problem, you can enable external access for them to say, I'm granting access for whatever's the reason. I usually put the ticket subject in there. And then you can control if they can't, maybe they can see how you've configured the system, but you want to, they can see how you configure the system, but maybe you want to deny access to data because they're sensitive data that you don't want them to be able to see. And you can choose how long the access is enabled for. I think it's a week by default. And last one we've got in here, license manager. This will just show you the list of all licenses in the system. And we'll talk more about the licenses when David does the pricing and additions. But for a given license, you can come in here and see like that sales Creatio product that we were looking at on Simon's user login. You can see the kind of license, when it's started, when it expires, the current status of that license, active or expired, and then how many. And if I click on it, it'll actually show me this little like metric of how many we have in use. And you can see that there's a couple users that have that license. And you can add more here if you wanted to. Any questions on any of that? I think that's what I've got on permissions. I can't think of anything that I'm overlooking, but let me know if you saw anything that I skipped by that seemed permissions related. But any questions on any of that before we wrap up?
Kevin, I just have one to ask, right? In my Creatio, it states that the licenses will expire in 1 day. So in terms of that, you can help me understand that?
Yeah, I could take a look at it. I think I'll wrap up the course and then we can, if you wanted to hang on, I can dig more to it with you. Is that like on a trial?
No, I'm talking about the Creatio that we would have to work in order to create the leads and so forth.
Yeah, then we'll take a look at it. We can do that after the class.
Okay, great.
All right. So I'm gonna wrap it up there. I think next session we'll look at some more reporting. We can look at some how to build printables. We can look at the portals. How to build and set up the self-service portal. And how to start building a web integration. So you could do like a REST API connection, things like that. Yeah, Nurse.
Yeah, I was following along my instance and I noticed when you were going through employees, I didn't see that as an option. I think this was like in Studio.
Yeah, you have to add it in the workspace. I couldn't find a workspace that was added to, so you just have to go into the setup view and add it.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Well, thank you everybody for coming. We'll see you next week. Have a good weekend.